All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, throughout the Democratic primary, and especially since South Carolina, we've spoken a lot here about the lessons for the populist left to learn from the Bernie Sanders campaign. Use the language of the everyday rather than the activist. Be serious about making an electability case in a time when electability concerns won the day. And probably above all, if you're going to run an anti-establishment campaign, then you got to run an anti-establishment campaign. Don't call your most significant rival your friend. Don't ignore massive liabilities of that rival. And don't punish members of your team who are just trying to make that case. Voters aren't going to believe that they should really invest their vote in overthrowing the Democratic establishment when you seem pretty friendly with the Democratic establishment. We're going to discuss some more of these lessons with the guests like Cenk Uygur, Chuck Rocha, Kyle Kulinski, Nathan Robinson, Ryan Grimm, and more today and tomorrow. So look forward to that. But just as important as learning the right lessons is not learning the wrong lessons. And make no mistake about it, the media and the Dem establishment are counting on you and everyone else learning the wrong lessons. You see, they want you to give up. They want you to think it's impossible for someone who believes in healthcare for all, in dismantling corporatism, in ending the wars, in preserving the planet to win. Why? Well, you know the answer. Because each item that I just ticked off in that list is a threat to the financial interests that really run Washington, D.C., to military-industrial complex and big pharma and the health insurers and the fossil fuel interests and the Wall Street financiers who profit off of all of it. And so what we'll hear over and over again, and which will undoubtedly become the conventional wisdom in this town once again, but which we must never accept, is that Bernie lost because he was too radical. His ideas, they'll tell us, were just too extreme. They were rejected by the American people and therefore abandon all hope. Get with the program, suck it up and vote Joe, and accept that the best you can hope for is the impossibly constrained, narrow incrementalism at best and regressive destruction at worst of the standard issue corporate Dems. It is not true. First of all, in every state with exit polling, Medicare for all was popular, and in most, it was very popular. And as we've covered on this show, as a pandemic rages and millions lose their jobs along with their employer-sponsored health insurance, support for that proposal has only gone up. 55% of all voters now support single-payer health care, with only 35% opposed. That majority support position includes strong majorities of both Democrats and independents, and even significant minorities of Republicans. That is in spite of millions upon millions in industry attack ads and relentless anti-single-payer messaging from basically every corner of the media and political spectrum, save, of course, for the Bernie Sanders wing. People have evaluated the arguments, and they made up their own minds. Rahm Emanuel and all the rest of the cynical operatives are wrong. Medicare for all is a winning position. Second of all, the Green New Deal is not only a moral imperative, but is also an electoral winner. In fact, the New Deal framing of the Green New Deal is exactly the type of rhetorical grounding in American tradition that should have frankly been more embraced by Bernie Sanders and his team. The Green New Deal represents a massive positive frame shift with its focus on good jobs as a core tenet of environmentalism rather than as a peripheral issue at best and a sacrificial lamb at worst. And we know from the polling that the Green New Deal was a huge part of the reason why Bernie garnered such enthusiasm and an overwhelming percentage of support among young people. In poll after poll, young voters told pollsters that climate change was their number one issue and that Bernie Sanders was the best candidate on that issue. In fact, voters of all ages preferred Bernie's approach on climate change. The best of Bernie's campaign was his central focus on economic issues that spoke both to our immediate bottom line and also to our best aspirations as a nation. This is a winning formula, and don't let anyone in the know-nothing media or Dem establishment convince you otherwise. Finally, let's remember, absent a few critical mistakes and an establishment which, to everyone's surprise, actually got their act together, Bernie could very well have won. Is it depressing that he lost to an incoherent husk with no ideas or vision? Yes, it is. But turn it around just slightly. Biden was the sitting vice president for 8 years to an immensely popular Democratic leader. He had personally high favorability levels and didn't suffer from the animus of the white working class in the way that Hillary did. He should have been a foregone conclusion, but he wasn't, not at all. And while Bernie enjoyed certain advantages that he did not have in 2016 in terms of name ID and proven fundraising ability, the 2020 landscape was in fact a fundamentally hostile one for him in that it was the least ideas and policy-driven Democratic primary in memory. In fact, given the evidence of how popular his ideas were, In a non-Trump landscape, where the primary actually turned on ideas and vision, Bernie would almost surely have won. Sure, Democrats this time argued about healthcare and war and all those things, but when it came down to it, the voters who overwhelmingly turned out to vote had one thing on their mind: beating Donald Trump. And so after decades of propaganda about the type of candidate who could win and the media relentlessly pushing the view that Bernie was a sure loser, even with all of that piled on top of him, he still almost pulled it all off, beating Pete and Liz and Kamala and Beto and Amy and all the rest. No one is out here saying the way Liz Warren or Pete Buttigieg or Kamala Harris does politics is fundamentally hopeless and should be abandoned completely. Well, in fairness, we are saying that, but no one in the mainstream. Now, there were mistakes that Bernie's campaign made that we've been clear-eyed about throughout, no doubt. And in the end, Bernie Sanders was a very rare thing, an actually decent human being in politics. It was both his greatest strength and why so many people loved him, but in the end, it may well have been his greatest weakness. But he also did a lot right. And those lessons of what went right and what needs to be kept to build on are just as important to take. He was the prophet who pointed the way. Bernie's greatest legacy is giving millions the courage to ask for and expect more. And once you've left that cage, there's no going back. Now it's time for us to finish the job. And Sagar, I can already see this drumbeat starting in the media as they explain their version of what went wrong with the Bernie campaign, which of course they'll never understand that actually—
He was too mean.
He was too mean, exactly. They'll never understand that actually he didn't go hard enough. He didn't prosecute the case hard enough. He wasn't willing to criticize Joe Biden, that those were more the things that went wrong. And also they'll say he was too mean, and they'll also say he was too radical, that, you know, he just had this leftist view and it's only a minority viewpoint. And on certain cultural leftist issues, those are areas to be careful. But on the core of his message around economics, it is not only very popular with the Democratic primary electorate, it's very popular with the general public, which is why I think, you know, we're going to see Trump, frankly, embracing some of those elements. We already see it in his coronavirus response, getting to the left on Democrats on issues like healthcare. So that's the piece that I want people to be very wary of as you hear that messaging coming out.
I think they have it exactly the opposite, whereas I would look at it and say, well, you know, kind of went way too far on the cultural leftism and not nearly hard enough into the economic populism and grounding that economic populism in a message of America. We're going to talk about with Chuck Rocha about what went wrong, but I do think, keep thinking. I'm like, okay, what happened? And a friend of the show, Zed Jelani, has been tweeting about this as well, about Medicare for all. I mean, Democrats have been fighting for, and single payer has actually been pretty popular since 1948 with Harry Truman, and yet it never happened. So I think that the story of this, and with Bernie, is not necessarily about making something politically palatable to the general public. It's actually an elite story of, like, how do you translate that into actually doing something? And that is the focus, if anything, that the progressive movement is going to have to focus on the most. But I think the most core message to what you said was about actually the way that you speak. Is that the way that you speak about these things? I remember Lee Fong of The Intercept tweeting to some progressives, and I found it funny because it's so obvious to me, about he was like, listen, I don't like Pete Buttigieg. He said something along these lines. But the way that Buttigieg speaks about hope and America and about the next generation and the dream and all these things, these are not things to be roundly ridiculed. It's the underlying substance that is to be ridiculed. It's that you have to speak in a way.
Not ready to go that far with Pete.
I know, but it's just—
he's just so full of platitudes. Like,
correct.
It doesn't land.
But
you know?
it doesn't land. But it's the framing of it all within a story of America, within a history, within a forward-looking vision of something like of a real history. That is something that was never spoken about, or very seldom spoken about, in the Sanders campaign. And amongst the new activist left, it is almost completely missing. There is no— there seems to be a thought that the entire country, I wouldn't say hates the country, or they don't view America as irredeemable as so much of the activist left. And if it is so irredeemable, actual Americans want to fix that. They don't want to endlessly criticize and proselytize themselves before the altar of political correctness or whatever of their mistakes. They want to say, okay, I want to build on something that my father did or my grandfather and fulfill that struggle. And I don't see very much of that.
I agree. I do want to say, though, I don't want to lose sight of how remarkable it is that a Democratic socialist won Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada. It's easy now that Biden's run up this big lead to be like, oh, we got crushed. But if it weren't for that, if it weren't for a few key things happening, Clyburn endorsing, Biden winning South Carolina big, and then this massive consolidation in the media rolling out the red carpet, like if that all didn't happen exactly when it did, Bernie Sanders would be on his way to being the Democratic nominee. So my point is, I don't want to lose sight of that, right? And it's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, it was all a mess, and he did this wrong, and he did it all wrong, and it was all... No, I mean, it's also, I think, very unusual, and people who have, who are historians can talk more about this on the show, but it's very unusual to be the person who sort of galvanizes the movement. Bernie Sanders for decades has been like the intellectual thought leader and galvanized the movement, and then actually is the person who takes power. Like, I don't think those things typically rest in the same individual because they take a different set of skills. So he was ultimately the prophet that pointed the way, that allowed people to believe that we don't have to accept, and I see this in myself, right? I was always sort of the left of edge of where I was allowed to be.
Right.
I was in college during 9/11, the start of the Iraq War, all of that. I was like a move on type Democrat. That was very formative for me, right? And I was always at the left edge of where you were allowed to be. During the Obama years, I would criticize him a little bit, but I didn't think you could really go further than what he was doing. And what Bernie Sanders has done is open the eyes of millions of people, and not just like activist type or pundits like me, ordinary people, to say, I deserve more. I can ask for more. We can do better than what is on offer right now. And that is a massive change that there is no putting back in the bottle. So that's a part of, I think, his movement that is so critical, has massively not only shifted the Overton window, but shifted the imagination and the possibilities that millions of Americans have in their minds right now. And that is not something that is going to go away.
Yeah, you should never overstate something or understate. So the media will say it was over. The American people rejected socialism, democratic socialism. That's obviously stupid. And we should never say, oh, we basically won the primary because all of his positions are adopted. No, it's a war, and it's essentially a draw. There's a couple of ways to look at it. I kind of look at it as a Barry Goldwater type figure when you're talking about a prophet, which is, there's a common saying on the right that Barry Goldwater won the 1964 election. It just took 16 years for him to win in the culmination of Ronald Reagan in 1980. It's very possible that that's what it was. Barry Goldwater went down in massive electoral defeat, but changed the way that people on the right thought about economics. I'm not going to say I agree with it necessarily, but he essentially changed the party from an Eisenhower party to like a cut taxes, much more economically libertarian, which may have met the moment at the time, and it was that actually ended up basically radicalizing an entire generation on the right of a movement that took years to organize, and then they won in the 1980 election. I think that might be a better way to think about and look at the Sanders campaign.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll take that long. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but there's a chance in order to do that.
Yeah, he has shifted the ground and made something possible that was not possible before.
Yeah, that's right.
Was not possible before, and I think that's the critical piece. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.